Those of you who are seriously behind in your Netflix binge watching, let me catch you up on Mad Men, a TV series set in the 1960s whose main character, Donald Draper, is supposed to be this super cool wonder kid ad man of the fictional advertising firm called Sterling Cooper. So, now that we all know who Donald Draper is, you're probably wondering, what do Donald Draper and advertising have to do with nursing? And actually, I'll bet that everyone sitting here today is already advertising some sort of patient and safety education every day in your daily practice. Because just about all nursing involves patient education, and just about all patient education involves marketing. For example, how many of you talked about diet and exercise to your patients last week? And of course, your patients were all excited about the idea of diet and exercise, right? No one loves diet and exercise, so you probably spend a considerable amount of time selling patients on the concept of diet and exercise. And that's basically what marketing is. Educating people about making a change that they don't think they want yet. And that's where Donald Draper comes in. Because today, I'm going to make you a very Mad Men-like 100% satisfaction money-back guarantee that by incorporating a few of the marketing QI strategies that we'll discuss here today, you all will be ready to go back home and channel your own inner Donald Draper to market your next QI project like Mad Men. First, to prove the strategy works, I'm going to take you through an example of a nursing QI project for a problem that my unit struggled with for years, and show you how, by using these techniques, this national benchmark outcome was transformed, increasing compliance by 60% in just 1 month. And while we walk through this project, we're going to talk about key steps and strategies to create your own marketing and ad campaign at home. We'll talk about the concept of message reframing to help your patients and staff see education through new eyes. And while we're at it, we're going to take this new marketing IQ and help you to turn it into big quality improvement outcomes for your next project. And probably the question on your mind at this point is, how does a nurse from Pittsburgh know the first thing about advertising and marketing? So a couple of years ago, my sister-in-law talked me into making a major career detour. She talked me into moving my husband and teenage boys from Buffalo, New York to Pittsburgh, PA to help her start up an internet company that marketed products to teenagers and 20-somethings. And the only way she talked me into such an unlikely scenario is that she's a bit of a Don Draper herself. She had been CEO of her own Sterling Cooper type ad agency before becoming Chief Marketing Officer for American Eagle Outfitters and Senior Executive Vice President of Marketing for Amazon.com. But she left all this to start this company, Lockers, which very, very quickly gained a huge following in Europe and Eastern Bloc countries. It earned millions of dollars in venture capital and grew so fast that we had to move our base of operations from Pittsburgh to Seattle so that we could get more tech help. So I ended up as leader of member experience for the company, which is like patient experience, reporting directly to one of the top ad women in America, while having a front row seat to learning marketing strategy from a real life Donald Draper. And so when we moved our offices to Seattle, those offices at Lockers were not unlike the crazy atmosphere that reigned at Sterling Cooper. Only instead of chain smoking and drinking scotch at 10 a.m., we had the requisite Silicon Valley startup atmosphere, including a company dog, people racing around on Razor scooters, shooting each other with Nerf guns, having hackathons, etc. Then in 2013, the company was acquired, which is basically the goal of most startup websites. And my sister-in-law left to take over as Chief Marketing Officer at Yahoo. And I got to come back to Pittsburgh and use my newly acquired advertising and marketing knowledge, combined with my previous NICU nursing skills, as manager of family experience at UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, as well as being the quality improvement manager for the National Children's Hospital Neonatal Collaborative. I have no conflicts to disclose. However, I will be mentioning a few brand names throughout this talk. Please understand this is not to promote any specific brands or products or companies in any way, but just as examples of how companies that we've all heard of use marketing techniques to educate their customers about their product. In the same way that we can use marketing strategies to market healthcare education to our patients. And since I mentioned that we're going to be talking about the marketing technique called reframing, I thought it would be fun for Donald Draper and I to take you on a little gallery tour that quite literally reframes the education, along with another former Pittsburgher, Mary Cassatt, one of America's great impressionists, whose favorite subjects for her paintings were breastfeeding mothers. Luckily for me, because that example project that I said we would be going through was a breastfeeding project that we did in our NICU at UPMC Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh. And even though breastfeeding may not be even a part of your vocabulary at your center, please keep in mind that these strategies can work in any setting. So while we walk through this project, I invite you to think about how you could use some of these strategies to solve problems in your own practice back home. And for this example, when I arrived at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh 6 years ago, there was a problem in the NICU that the breast milk at discharge metric for our NICU was 45%, while the national benchmark metric was 72%, which was really surprising because at UPMC, all the other metrics are way up here, and this one metric was quite low. And in the NICU world, I know most of you don't track breast milk at discharge, but in the NICU world, this is a really important benchmark rubric that counts with the same weight as CLABSIs and accidental extubations for U.S. News. And so a couple of weeks after I arrived at Children's, our NICU medical director, an amazing QI leader, ran up to me in the hallway one day and announced that she had a little project for me. In her hand, she was conveniently clutching a smart aim on a sheet of paper that she had scribbled down. And the smart aim was to increase maternal breast milk at discharge from 45% to 72% over the next 12 months and sustain. So, little project. And my big question for her was, why? What was the reason that this one metric was so low? So I basically went around asking everyone I met if they could tell me the answer. But the only answer I ever got was, it's always been like this. But one thing I knew was that if we didn't discover the root cause of the problem, we'd never solve it. So I did a root cause analysis by turning to the data. And if there are any other QI geeks out there like me, you will recognize this man as W. Edward Deming, the father of quality improvement. His mantra was, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." Because data always tells a story. So I did an evidence-based literature search and then dove into the CDC's breastfeeding report cards. Now, the federal government is actually a treasure trove of good data. One often has to cull through it, but I recommend it to all of you as freely available source of really good information. In this case, most of the CDC breastfeeding report cards discussed who is breastfeeding at 6 months and a year at 18 months, but that didn't really help me. Then, as I went through, I discovered one section that included initiation of breastfeeding. And even though in the NICU world, breast milk at discharge is a metric that counts, you can get all the mothers lactating, but if they're not still providing breast milk at discharge, it doesn't count for you. So even though the breast milk at discharge was the metric we were looking at, I realized if we didn't get moms to initiate lactation, there was no chance that they would be breastfeeding at discharge. So this proved to be a key metric for understanding the problem. As I scanned through the initiation rates state by state, I started to notice a pattern. So I grabbed this map and started plotting out the rates. And here's exactly what I found. Over on the left coast here, these green states are top initiators of breastfeeding, but from, greens over here. But from this Pennsylvania, which is this big red rectangle up here, from Pennsylvania down, we were all low initiators of breastfeeding. And this instantly told me the answer to the reason our rates were so low. Who here can tell me what the problem was just by looking at this map? Because if the reds and greens were kind of evenly distributed all over the map, I still wouldn't know. Can you guess what this pattern tells us? Culture. It was a culture problem. And we know that culture is the hardest thing to change, but that we can educate out cultural bias if we have 20 to 30 years. However, in the NICU, we only have a lactation initiation window of 3 to 5 days. So we needed a little quicker solution to the problem. So when my medical director came up and asked me to start the project, she said, "Don't worry, we've already done all the education for the staff," which was great because they did an excellent evidence-based literature search and came up with this very compelling list of reasons for mothers to provide breast milk for their babies. So the fact that it lowers the risk of leukemia, diabetes, asthma, NEC, sudden infant death syndrome, those were all really compelling reasons. And I said, "This is so great. What did you used to do before we started this project?" And she said, "Well, this was the same list that we used to educate mothers before, but now we're going to do more of it." So I said, "Well, how about if we offer some kind of incentive to the moms to start breastfeeding?" And she said, "Oh, we already are." Turns out that for 12 months before I started the project, they had already been providing 3 free meal tickets a day to mothers who would provide breast milk, which is when I realized that if this compelling list of evidence plus 3 free breastfeeding meal tickets a day for our mostly indigent families weren't doing the trick, we really needed to find a different route to a solution. And probably not surprisingly, since I just came from a marketing company, I suggested that what we needed was a marketing campaign. After all, when we started at Lockers, we started with only 6 employees, including a nurse and 2 college kids. Yet 9 months later, our website had gained over 17 million members. In fact, we were the fastest growing website that you've never heard of in 2009. And the reason that you've never heard of us is that a couple hacker gamer sites in Belarus, Russia, and Poland discovered us in 2009 and took us viral by telling other hacker gamer sites about us. So almost no one had heard of us in the US, but we ended up becoming an overnight sensation with the international gamer teenage boy crowd, with 17 million members in 192 countries around the world, which generated $66 million in venture capital funding. So if these strategies could motivate strangers halfway across the world, I thought, why not try them with patient families right here in front of us on our unit? And I know in healthcare, we always save our big ta-da slide for the end, but to show you how effective these strategies can be, I'll start off with the ta-da. So as you can see, for the 18 months before we started this project, we're at 45%, and our goal was to be at 72%. And here in November 2013, we started the project, and within 1 month, we increased to 76%, meaning we surpassed our year-end SMART Aim goal in just 1 month. And we all know the first month you start a project, everybody's excited, you get a big boost, but sometimes it doesn't always continue. However, by using these strategies, we have continued for over 5 years now at an average of 82%. So I'm telling you, these strategies can work. And the key to running a marketing campaign on your unit, there's a bunch of of strategies that they use in marketing that we also often use in healthcare. So the first is goal setting, and as we just showed in marketing, they usually start with a root cause analysis. We usually start with SMART aim goals, which is great, although it doesn't always focus on what the problem was, which is an important thing to understand thoroughly before you can move ahead. Market research is what they do, and we do just as well, if not better, with evidence-based literature review. We do product testing with meds and equipment, just like they do in marketing. They also do focus group testing, which we are in a prime situation to do in healthcare. Branding, you probably all have slogans already for your projects. In marketing, they use slogans. They also take it a little further with kind of lifestyle image. Elevator pitch. Elevator pitch is something that's critical to projects that we could learn from. And multi-channel marketing, we actually do some of this, but in marketing, multi-channel marketing is like a really structured plan of what the message is, who's going to deliver it, how it's delivered, when it's delivered. And we can do the same thing with multidisciplinary teamwork. And when we do, we rock it harder than any marketing campaign. Quotas. Now, we sometimes review our metrics at a monthly staff meeting maybe, which is great. But in marketing, everybody on the team knows every day, or at least weekly, what the quotas are, where everybody is, how we're doing on sales. So if everybody on your unit doesn't know what your CLABSI rate is or your CAUTI rate, be a good thing to spread so everybody's on the same page and knows where we are and can help improve. And the last is reframing and storytelling, which is really the most powerful of all marketing techniques that we could use for free. So how many of you recognize this Coppertone ad? Showing, of course, that you are old like I am. This Coppertone ad is, I'm sure, dates from before anyone here, but it's an ad that some of you might remember from growing up, because in the olden days, people used to believe that it's really good for babies to be outside, getting fresh air in the sunshine, and that the sign that you were a good mother is, and your child isn't sitting around and watching television, is that they're nice and brown. So Coppertone sold this suntan lotion to help get your babies nice and tan. And then, of course, medical science recognized that early sun exposure causes skin cancer. So the very smart people at Coppertone realized that instead of thinking this is bad news for them, that they wouldn't be able to sell any more of their suntan lotion, they realized this is good news. They immediately rebranded by adding SPF to their product and hired some really good ad men to reframe their message. And the current Coppertone message is one that tells America, yes, babies still should get plenty of sunshine and fresh air, not be inside watching television, but be out playing. But now good mothers slather their babies with our new sunscreen to keep them healthy. And as a consequence, Coppertone ended up selling much more sunscreen than they had ever sold for children's suntan lotion. And what I love about this ad is this is a perfect lifestyle type marketing, because they could have shown, like some companies do, like show a picture of the bottle so you recognize it when you go to the store with big SPF on it to show it has sunscreen, but instead they chose to use this picture of this very pale baby outdoors having fun, and so there's no actual product that you see, but it gives you the whole idea of the concept that they're trying to educate their customers about. And that's what really good message reframing does. It's storytelling that allows people to see the big picture more clearly. Here are two of the best storytellers around. You'll recognize one as J.K. Rowling, who gave us all Harry Potter, that we can't wait to go to Universal Studios tonight and see them. And she says there's always room for a story that can transport people to another place. And that's exactly what we're doing with our message reframing and storytelling, to take your education and change it from how the patients or staff are thinking about what you're saying now to transport them to their own goals. And this other gentleman you probably don't recognize. However, hang on 1 minute, getting to it. And you may not recognize this second man, but I'll bet you all know the way he reframed the way we all shop. Who here has Amazon Prime? This is the man that you can thank. His name is Andy Jassy. He's now CEO of Amazon Web Services. Back in 2004, when Amazon was mostly still selling just books, Andy told me about this idea he had for Amazon Prime, where everything you bought would ship to your house for free. And I said, well, that's crazy, Andy. You'll lose money. People buy things for $2 that could cost you $7 to ship. And he said, yeah, they will buy things for $2, but once they experience the magic of that $2 item arriving for free on their doorstep by just clicking a button and not having to get up and go to the store to find it and buy it, they'll also start buying a couple of $100 items that cost $7 to ship, and pretty soon they'll buy everything they need from Amazon Prime. And now people come all the time to Andy with their big ideas to suggest for Amazon. And he says he makes his team work backwards. If somebody comes to him with a great idea, he says, I make my teams write our press release first, before we even start a project. If the press release doesn't inspire us, then we should switch to a project that will. So for him, the press release when he was starting Amazon Prime was that, skipping this part. Gotta keep going. Go too long. And it was from people at Amazon that I learned one of my most important marketing strategies. And that's because when Kleiner Perkins gave us the $66 million in venture capital funding, their one ask was that we move our base of operations from Pittsburgh to Seattle to get more tech help, because we had all these members halfway around the world who would be up at night while we were home in bed, who would take our website down every night. So Kathy chose to move to Seattle instead of Silicon Valley because she had worked at Amazon and knew where she could find some coders to help her with the site. So what I learned at Amazon is, from the former Amazonians, was that when there was a problem, it didn't matter what it was, even if it was like a link broken on the website, the answer to every problem for people from Amazon is KYC. And KYC stands for Know Your Customer. And we can adapt that for our purposes to know your patient or know your staff. But KYC, when there was a problem in our office, it was like bees buzzing around. Everyone saying KYC, 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 because that's what they drill into them at Amazon, that when there's a problem, you go back to the needs of the customer. So I thought, KYC, I'll hang around our NICU family waiting room and talk with the families and the mothers and the grandmothers and the fathers about breastfeeding so I could understand how they felt. And what I quickly learned was, despite the fact that we presented them with all this really good, compelling, evidence-based healthcare information, they still tended to see breastfeeding as kind of a cultural lifestyle choice instead of a health choice. I had one grandmother who told me, well, I didn't breastfeed my children, but I look at it this way. Breastfeeding and formula is like the difference between sending your child to school with a homemade lunch and an apple or lunch money and an apple. Either way, they're going to get good nutrition. When I heard that, I realized we really need to do some message reframing next. So where to start in telling your reframe story? And this is where probably, I bet all of you are already doing this. You come up with a slogan, right? A catchy slogan that reminds everybody what your project is about, which is great. What are some slogans that you all use? Oh, that's good. That's perfect, actually. 3 words. That's nice and short to the sweet. Tells me the whole idea about your project. And that is, try and keep it short. I did have, once I asked this question, and somebody told me like the 16-word slogan they had, try and keep it short and sweet. And we all recognize really good slogans, right? And we do because they are good slogans. No, that's not what I meant to say. I meant to say, we all recognize great slogans, which is, of course, what makes them great slogans. For instance, what does Just Do It remind you of? Right? Nike. How about I'm loving it? Mickey D's. This one's a little trickier. Do you know this one? Live Your Life? American Eagle Outfitters. Thank you. Kathy came up with that. I'll give her credit. So here I am thinking that I'm this great marketing expert, and we go to a meeting to brainstorm a great slogan. And who came up with a great slogan? Not me. Our Doogie Howser neonatologist, our Melissa Riley, one of our doctors, came up with this excellent slogan that breast milk equals medicine, which is really the perfect slogan because it says exactly what we're trying to educate the parents about. Who can tell me what the number 1 cause of mortality is in NICUs? Necrotizing enterocolitis, right, neck. And what is the one thing that can help prevent neck, or at least decrease morbidity? Right, breast milk, because breast milk is like medicine for sick babies. The next thing that you need in your marketing campaign is an elevator pitch. And this is really crucial. It makes a big difference. And an elevator pitch is a couple sentences that you can use to describe your project. It tells the whole concept, it's quick, and people can say it consistently. So when somebody asks them about their project, they can tell them in the time it takes to get on an elevator and go from the 1st floor to the 3rd floor, you should be able to say your whole project in a way that everyone can repeat it over and over in the same way. So for this project, here is our elevator pitch, and I'll show it to you on one of our infographic cards. So an infographic card is a picture that gives you cues by the pictures what you're trying to portray. So here we have our reframed message next to the elevator saying, this is our elevator pitch. And our elevator pitch for Breast Milk Equals Medicine project was that despite all of our fancy technology and our brilliant doctors and our amazing nurses, there is still one thing that your baby really needs in NICU that we don't have for them. It's a kind of a medicine, and there's only one person who can provide this medicine, and that's mom. Because breast milk is medicine for sick babies. And here's the other side of the card, another infographic that tells talking points. It doesn't write them all out, because if I just put text on, nobody's going to read them. And we don't, by the way, we don't give this card to our patients at all. This is just for staff. So they have this card, they put it in their pocket, and a new baby comes in, they can pull out their card and review it before they talk to the family, so everybody can say the same or the same kind of message. It's okay for them to reframe it in their own words, as long as it's basically the same message for everybody. Oh, going the wrong way. And next, before you finalize your slogan or your especially your elevator pitch, and definitely before you spend money to make up infographic cards, you need to test it. Test the verbiage. And focus group testing is something that they use in marketing that costs a lot of money. Like, they have to find potential customers. They they schedule them to come in, they pay them to come in, they have to pay for room and drinks and parking, and then they pay them to participate, to let them try the product and give them feedback on it. Whereas in healthcare, we can do this much more easily, but we don't always do it. In healthcare, we have not only our potential customers, but our actual customers there in real time that we can get feedback from, and they're really happy to give us the feedback. And next, I highly, highly recommend that everyone uses this technique, PDSA, which is a quality improvement technique for working out the kinks in a project before you roll the project out instead of afterwards. And this is the reason that I love QI, because it's all about making the process better. And I really believe that when something goes wrong, especially in hospitals filled with magnet nurses, it's rarely an individual's fault. It's almost always a broken process that's at fault, not an individual's fault. So I'm a big proponent of PDSA testing. PDSA is Plan, Do, Study, Act. And the idea of it is that you plan by doing things small, testing it, getting feedback, and then acting on it by doing continuous cycles until you get it right. And there are two reasons that you should do PDSA cycles. The first is that sometimes in the healthcare world, someone, say a doctor, comes up with this great idea. And so they're like, okay, we're all going to do this great idea. And we're going to spend all this money and buy this new equipment and change the protocol and educate all the nurses. And then we're going to roll it out. And then we find out what the problems are. So next time someone suggests doing that, please recommend that they do a couple of PDSA cycles first. So instead of spending all that money, you do it as low-tech and inexpensively as you can to test it, and you only test it with a couple people, like a couple nurses, a couple unit techs, and a couple patients at a time. You test small the proposed change, and then you gather feedback on how it worked. So say you want to have new whiteboards. Instead of buying all new whiteboards and then finding what's wrong with them, get a piece of paper the same size as that space you have for the whiteboard, tape it up on the wall, and give your nurse and your patient and your nurse practitioner and your health unit coordinator and your whoever is going to write on that whiteboard, give them a marker and ask them during the day to go in and write what they would like to see on the whiteboard. And at the end of the day, you take those, if you do it with two patients, you put them together, see what you think are similarities. You redo it, try it again the next day with two different patients and two different teams, and tape it up in their rooms and try it again. And then you look at those outcomes, use that feedback, do a third iteration, and keep repeating that process until you have a whiteboard that's really useful for everyone. And the second reason that you should do a PDSA is to eliminate workarounds. Because I would love to blame it all on the doctors, but actually we nurses often empower the doctors to we nurses often empower bad process by our really wonderful, incredible, innovative workarounds. But next time you come up with innovative workarounds, like say the doctors order new trach tubes that nobody's tested, and they get rid of the old trach tubes, they bring in trach tubes, and then like the first time someone goes to use it, one of the nurses says, oh my gosh, look at this, these trach tubes are twice as big as a baby's trachea, what are we going to do? I know, here, I have this pen, I'll just take the ink out of the center and sterilize it, and we'll use that as a trach tube. Yay! Right? We do workarounds. So next time you come across a workaround, instead of continuing the workaround process, please institute a couple PDSA cycles, and then with your next project, do some PDSA cycles so that when you're ready to roll it out, you've already worked out the problems in advance. So this is an example of the PDSA testing that we did with our families. And so first, we went to the staff and asked which of the benefits of breast milk we thought they would find the most compelling, that the families would find most compelling. The benefits for baby now, the benefits for baby's future health, which was basically what we were teaching, the benefits for mom, the benefits for the family you want, the benefits for dad. And what do you think our staff chose? That's what I would have chose. The family wallet is what I thought was going to be most compelling. Then we took it to families and parents and the unit, and I also started a NICU Family Advisory Board, and we started getting feedback from them. And what they told us was that these three things were the most impactful benefits of breastfeeding to talk about during the first week after admission. Kind of surprisingly that it was really about mom, but maybe not, because here the mom thought she was having a healthy baby, going home the next day, and instead we took the baby away to the NICU and she lost all control, so maybe she just wants to at least gain control over things she can control. So the benefits that appealed to moms the first week were that breastfeeding or pumping breast milk burns 550 plus calories a day, stimulates uterine evolution, and there's evidence that it decreases postpartum depression. And interestingly, the decrease in postpartum depression was also very, very high on the dad's list, because when we took that baby away to the NICU and he saw mom laying there crying, he could see what was coming down the pike. So he's like, yes, we need to breastfeed to decrease that postpartum depression. But even when you think you found the answer, like we thought we had in the last frame there, we need to keep asking. You've heard of the 5 whys. You want to keep asking until you really find the answer, because the first week after the baby arrived in the NICU, it turns out really the free breastfeed meal tickets did not have a lot of impact for moms at all. Everybody thought their baby wasn't going to be there very long. They'd be going home in a couple days. They didn't really need those tickets. But after a week, which is when their breast milk, if they didn't initiate lactation, would have dried up, after the first week, these are the things that are most impactful. That breastfeeding is the number one thing mom can do to help get the baby home sooner. That the daily reinforcement of calling mom a super mom. One day I went in and talked to one of our moms. She said, "You're the 6th person today who told me I'm a super mom for pumping breast milk." And any moms here? Yeah, for moms, like, what wouldn't you do to be told that 6 times a day that you're a super mom, right? And whatever it was, you would never stop doing it. If there was a chance people were going to keep doing it, you would never stop. So, and then after the first week, that's when the free meal tickets started to become actual incentives when the mothers realized they were going to be there for a really, really long time in the NICU. But my light bulb moment in the project came one day when I was out in the NICU family waiting room talking with a mom who really did not want to breastfeed. She had planned on formula feeding, but I gave her our elevator pitch, and she agreed to at least try to not breastfeed because her baby was too sick to breastfeed at that point, but try pumping. And so she was all set to do it until her mother walked into the family waiting room. And then she pulled me over to the side and says, wait a minute, you don't understand. I can't do this. Shoot, hang on a minute. You don't understand. I can't do this because in my family, we make fun of those women that you see in the mall hanging out there breastfeeding. And she was right. I hadn't understood that mindset. So in that moment was really my light bulb moment, because at that moment I realized that this is the picture that that Brittany and other families in this demographic think of when they think of breastfeeding. Now, this was Time Magazine's most controversial cover of 2012. And the reason it was controversial is that to many, many people, this picture is a photograph of the most selfless, most wonderful, most generous act that any mother can perform for her child, to breastfeed them until they're ready to wean. Yet to others, as particularly families in my cultural demographic, this was not a positive image. They did not see this as a positive image. It made me realize that everyone brings their own cultural biases to the table, no matter what it is, but especially an emotional issue like this. And it made me realize that I had to examine my own cultural biases, because my idea of what breastfeeding was more like the picture on the left of because I was the oldest of 7 children in a Catholic family, so I can barely remember when my mother wasn't breastfeeding. But that's not the picture that everyone saw when we were begging them to breastfeed. So we quickly went back to the drawing board and changed again our slogan and the way we were going to talk about breastfeeding. And we decided to desexualize the idea of breastfeeding by taking the breasts right out of it. Now we call it mom's milk. Mom's milk equals medicine. And again, the answer was KYP, know your patient. Because when I first came to Pittsburgh, I didn't know anything about Pittsburgh. This was all I knew, the Steelers. But after I'd been there a little while, I realized that Pittsburgh is a beautiful city. It has more trees per square foot than any other city in America. It has more bridges than almost any city in the world. It's one of the most beautiful children's hospitals in the country. And is also the only level 4 NICU in the region. Unlike the hospital I came from, Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh is not a birth hospital. So no babies are born there. Most babies are flown in from up to 4 or 5 hours away because they are mostly surgical, medically complex infants. And everyone knows Andy Warhol, another Pittsburgh native, actually, who was famous in the 60s for his pictures of tomato soup cans and cows, and was thought at the time for being kind of crazy for his innovative ideas. And I realized that, like our fellow Pittsburgher Andy, that for many years, from the first day of admission, we had been doing something kind of crazy. We had been begging moms to breastfeed, like every other level 4 NICU in the country. But it was kind of crazy that we were doing that, because babies who are admitted to a level 4 NICU are usually NPO for at least the first week of life because they're too sick to take enteral feeds. So it was kind of crazy that we were begging mothers to breastfeed when there was no chance that they would be able to breastfeed. In fact, even mothers who really wanted to, if there was their goal in life growing up, it was to breastfeed their children, those mothers couldn't even breastfeed, and our begging them to breastfeed just reinforced their disappointment. So instead, we finally stopped begging mothers to breastfeed at the time of admission, and instead started marketing initiation of pumping mom's own milk. And this isn't the way you'd want to, this isn't the way you'd want to market breastfeeding if you work in labor and delivery. This is not the verbiage you should use. And I'm sure that just my saying this probably upset some of our wonderful IB CLCs and CBCs and LCs out there. I don't want to upset you. Just hang on for one more slide, because even though we might take the long way around by asking mothers, by marketing pumping to our patients, In the end, it turned out that 92% of the mothers who attempted lactation initiation for at least 3 days by pumping were still providing breast milk discharge. And a huge percentage are now breastfeeding at discharge as well, which we almost never had. So, again, this was good verbiage for reframing breastfeeding for our population, but not for everybody. So you have to find the verbiage that works best. Do your PDSA tests and find out what works best with your families. And the last technique we're going to talk about is multi-channel brand marketing. So multi-channel brand marketing is planned, strategic architecture, blueprint of who's going to deliver the message, what the message is, who's going to deliver it, how it's going to be delivered, when it's going to be delivered. And so, as I said, we all have these great little slogans, which is a good place to start. And then in our project, we decided to take it to the next level. I should go back and say multi-channel brand marketing is all the different ways that you're going to market. So in the marketing world, you might see the same product marketed in a magazine ad and on television and at the beginning of movie trailers and in print ads and coupons and all those different ways, YouTube. That's multi-channel brand marketing. And so after we had our slogan, the next thing we did was think about our point of purchase, because you might not know the term, but you all know what point of purchase is. How many people here are mothers? Does this ever happen to you that you're walking through the grocery store with your kids and they're being little angels? You're almost through the store, you get to the checkout counter, and there, down at eye level, where the kids can all see it, they have these point of purchase candy displays. And suddenly, everybody's laying on the floor screaming and crying. It takes you 20 more minutes to get out of the store, right? So that's what point of purchase is. So for us, we use as point of purchase our transport team, because our babies are born, they're flown to Children's, and the mothers are often are always left at the birth hospital, often for several days before we even see them. So the only people who do see them is our transport team. They go to pick up the babies, they go and see the mothers and take the babies for the mothers to see them before they leave. And the last thing they do before they leave is they deliver our elevator pitch and hand the mothers our Breast Milk Equals Medicine talking points infographic sheet to remind them once they leave, to remind the mothers why they should provide breast milk. And next, I don't know about you, but I get these annoying robocaller calls all the time to market, people marketing products. So instead of the annoying robocaller calls, the transport team tells mom that the doctor will be calling her in a couple hours after the baby gets there. And then again, here's our Melissa Riley, our medical director, who is calling the mother and tells her all about how the baby's doing. And at the end, right before she gets off, the last thing she does is give her our elevator pitch, telling her that there's only one thing the baby needs that we don't have, and that's breast milk medicine, and that mom is the only one who can provide it. And magically, everyone just about agreed to provide breast milk for their babies. And even though they may say yes to transport, or they may say yes to the doctors, sometimes they don't actually end up starting to pump and initiate lactation before they get to us. So when they come, we have something else for them, rewards-based marketing. How many of you have bought new cars in the last year? And what came on the radio of your new car? Yes, satellite radio. And the reason they put that satellite radio in there is because even though you may never have thought you wanted satellite radio, they know that you can't help but play with that new, shiny, brand new car, and that you will listen to it and you'll probably want to keep it. And that's what we do. Even if the mom says that she didn't want to pump to transport and to the doctors, we still have that pump all set up with the brand new shiny equipment, because that's part of the fun of having a new baby, right? To get all those new gadgets. And so it also says to them that we expect them to do this. So the mothers are likely to try it, and as we know, if they will initiate lactation for 3 days, they will probably continue till discharge at least. So next we have this is where our free meal tickets come in, our purchase incentives, but even more importantly, we have our storytellers. Our nurse practitioners then go in and talk about breast milk being like medicine, and then our nurses go in and they deliver our elevator pitch and tell stories about how good this is for babies. And next we actually even have what some might call TV ads. So this is a whole nother project, so I'll just touch on it for a minute. But in our NICU, my family advisory board that I started, they said that one of the problems with the patient education is that when dad arrives in the NICU the day the baby's admitted and grandma, the nurse sits them down and makes them watch all these educational videos because she has a discharge checklist, an admission checklist that she has to check off. So at that point, when the baby was just born and taken away, flown to intensive care, the parents say that they're really not ready at that point to take in any of that education. They can't recall one thing that those videos told them. So they suggested, couldn't we have some kind of education that's just in the family waiting room that they could look at any time they were ready to look at it? So I worked with so I had an idea for configuring this, what we call a helioscreen, and went to our ISD leaders and asked them if we could have this, and they laughed at me and told me that it was going to cost $10,000 to have this kind of helioscreen. But just an example of how if you have a good nursing idea that you think is going to help your patients, not to give up, because 9 months later, at a $0 cost, we had a helioscreen hanging in our NICU family waiting room by using retired hospital resources such as an old computer that was abandoned by the doctors and the television that didn't fit with the rest of the TV systems. And so now we have 24/7 family education that families can participate in voluntarily at their own individual self-determined point of learning readiness. And just when this all sounds so easy, right? It was not easy. We had many barriers to overcome, and I'd like to discuss two of those barriers. The first one is a story that I love to tell because I don't think you could have a better example of structural empowerment and transformational leadership than what happened with our CNO who empowered my project and all of our nurses and families. So when I arrived at Children's and started this project, we only had 12 breast pumps for the NICU and the whole hospital, which actually was fine because we had so few moms providing breast milk, pumping breast milk. But we launched the project in November, and by the end of the month, 3/4 of the mothers were pumping breast milk. And so there was this really long line for the mothers who didn't have room pumps to use our one lactation room. So I went to our unit director and I showed her the metrics. I said, we have all these moms pumping, so we need about 30 more pumps. And she looked into it and came back to me and said, the pumps cost $2,400 a piece, and she doesn't have any money for breast pumps. So why don't I go ask our medical director, who's the one who told me to start the project? So I went to the medical director, who told me she didn't have any money in her budget either, and sent me to materials management, who of course had no money for me, and sent me to our nursing supervisor. And my nursing supervisor very nicely said, oh, MJ, that is great that you have all these moms pumping. That's wonderful. But, a lot of times these projects start out big and then we just go back to the same level we were at. So why don't we check back in 6 months and see how you're doing, and maybe then we could buy a couple more pumps. So at this point, I was very discouraged because I knew by 6 months, our project was going to go back to, our breastfeeding culture was going to go right back where it was if we didn't find another way around. And I knew that data tells a story. And I went home and grabbed one of my kids' black and white composition books and used the lowest tech solution ever. I started working with the unit secretaries, who are the ones, if a nurse needed a pump, she would tell the unit secretary and she would call materials management for the pump. And I said, okay, what we need to do is call every single time a mom needs a pump. We have to make the call to materials management and then write down what they say, if they have a pump for us or not. And so one night I was in the hospital at 10 o'clock at night writing down the last of my orders for breast pumps when I hear this voice behind me saying, "Mary Jo, what are you doing?" And I turn around to great surprise to find my chief nursing officer standing right behind me. And I was surprised on many levels, actually, because, well, it was 10 o'clock at night, and I didn't think chief nursing officers worked at that time. But it turns out that Diane Hupp is often at our hospital at night, often handing out goodies, as she was that night with her little ice cream cart for the night nurses. And the second reason that I was surprised is that it was 10 o'clock at night, and I'd been there since 7 a.m., and I was a disheveled wreck. Yet Diane Hupp, as always, was perfect. Our chief nursing officer is like 6 foot tall and maybe weighs 97 pounds soaking wet. She's like supermodel, and she always looks perfect hair, perfect clothes, perfect all the time. And there I am, like my hair is sticking out. I haven't brushed my hair since I left at 8 o'clock that morning. Yet she's perfect at all hours. So I grabbed my notebook to show her my little pathetic notebook data collection. And here is what we did. And if you ever need support for something in your hospital and you're trying to prove that, this is the best foolproof way to collect data. So I had written the number of materials management really big so nobody had to go and look for it, and told the unit techs that I would call during the day for them, and when I went home, then they could call for pumps if someone needed them. But they needed to make the call and write it down every single time somebody asked them for a pump, even if they knew they didn't have any more pumps, even if they called 5 minutes before, they still had to do it. This, by the way, is not the way to popularity with your materials management, but it is effective in the end. And sometimes a low-tech solution works best. So this is what we did. We wrote it down every single time, the room number, the name, the date, the time, who ordered it, and kind of cut it off there. But what the result was, whether we got breast pumps or not. And basically, these were all no's. And by the way, this is not protected health information. I substituted the names of mothers and babies with the cast of Hamilton, you might recognize. So not PHI. And really, the reason to do this is that data does tell the story. And the data obviously must have spoken to our chief nursing officer that night, because she took a look through my notebook and said immediately, "Well, you need more pumps." And magically, 3 months later, 30 new breast pumps arrived in our NICU after I'd asked so many other people for them. And by this, and more importantly, by this act of structural empowerment and transformational leadership, not only did she save my project, but and not only did she save our breast milk at discharge rate metrics, she also saved our bedside nurses from endless frustration of trying to find pumps for the mothers, and has now empowered over 3,000 mothers to pump breast milk for their sick infants. And who knows how many of those 3,000, more than 3,000 sick infants she has saved from getting NAC or helped to go home sooner by providing the pumps for the mothers to pump the breast milk. Plus, the night nurses got ice cream. And the second barrier we face in the project I'm not going to have time for this, was not a problem with equipment. It was a problem that came up because I underestimated the impact of cultural bias on our NICU staff nurses and doctors, because I had forgotten that these doctors and nurses had grown up in this same red demographic with the same cultural bias as our patients. And despite the fact that they went to medical school and nursing school, it just proved once again what Deming says: culture eats strategy for breakfast. So what we did was a focus group. We got our more resistant doctors and nurses and nurse practitioners together and asked them what it was about the breast milk equals medicine project that they weren't really buying into. And a single commonality they all shared, these staff, it turned out, was that they had formula fed their own children. And one of the nurses said it best by saying, I know that breastfeeding is supposed to be best, but I formula fed my 3 kids and they grew up to be perfectly healthy. So for me, I just don't feel right telling these moms that breastfeeding is best. And really, KYS, know your staff. What was this nurse saying here? That by telling mothers that if they were good mothers, they would provide breast milk for their baby because breastfeeding is best, and they didn't breastfeed their children. What does that say about them? What does that say to them about themselves? That they're not good mothers. And for any of you who are mothers, you know all about maternal guilt, and it's the last. And I'm a mother. The last thing in the world I would ever want to subject any person in the world to is maternal guilt, because that's the last thing I would ever want to be subjected to. And again, this is not the politically correct way to discuss breastfeeding outside of a level 4 NICU setting, but for our families in level 4 NICU, this was the best way. This was what worked to help them